Hello, I'm Susan Cole.
And I'm Matthew Hodson.
And welcome to aidsmapCHAT Pride Special, our live broadcast bringing you news for people living with HIV all around the globe.
We have an extraordinary lineup of LGBT guests for this evening's show. We have one of the founders of Stonewall. She's a legendary lesbian. She's now working in HIV prevention, particularly in Wales, Lisa Power. We have Dr. Mike Brady, who is the LGBT Health Advisor in the UK. We have writer Juno Roche. She wrote Gender Explorers and Trans Power and Queer Sex, great books, and the iconic Peter Tatchell, the human rights and LGBT activist. So extraordinary lineup, so excited. Everyone's been talking to me about it before the show, and I really can't wait to meet all these people.
Absolute legends, one and all. So very, very excited. So Matthew, what does Pride mean to you?
Well, I've been thinking about it a bit, and I was thinking about the first ever Pride March, which I went on, which for me was 1986. So I think that's 14 years after the first UK Pride March. And how different it is now, or was at least in the pre-COVID era, to how it was then. Because then I think we had about 10, 12,000 people, but it was still the biggest Pride March, the biggest collection of LGBT people I'd ever been amongst. And I went on Trans Pride on Saturday in London, and it was very much that same community feeling. And it felt great to be there amongst so many wonderful, glorious people. And I think about Pride, and I think about how we take what people may criticize us for, what people may tell us is bad or wrong. And we take those and those things that people use against you to shame you. And you say, no, I don't believe this is bad. This is a part of me. And if I'm going to love myself, which is kind of essential to survival, then I'm going to have to love myself, that part of me too. I'm going to embrace that aspect of me, which is different and which may make people feel uncomfortable, but I'm proud of it and I'm going to be powerful with it, because that's how we make change, not by hiding away and not by being ashamed, but by being open and proud. And the way I feel about being gay is also the way I feel about living with HIV. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to be ashamed of it. It's a part of me and I'm proud of it.
How wonderful. I think that we should bring on our first guest.
Yes, well, we've been talking about power, so let's bring on Lisa Power.
Hello.
Hi, Lisa.
Hello,
how are
Lisa.
you?
Hi.
Now, Lisa, I want to talk with you about your history with HIV activism, because lesbians as a group, are the sexuality group which are least personally affected by HIV. They're least likely to acquire HIV. Or are you going to?
Well, no, this is true in terms of lesbian sex. However, as we know, lines aren't always that sharp. And I think what I've always been particularly concerned about is that people take on an identity and it may not necessarily always be everything that's going on with their lives. So being told that as lesbians you're not at risk doesn't actually tell you that you could still be sharing needles, you could still be doing other things, you could be doing sex work, which can occasionally get dangerous in terms of risk. There are lots of other things that you could be doing. And frankly, in the 80s and the 90s, the lines were drawn so rigidly between lesbian and gay on one side and straight on the other in terms of identity, that there were quite a few people who weren't really keeping to those rigid restrictions, and who basically needed some decent advice and didn't know how to ask for it, because you would be shamed out of the community as well.
That's really, obviously a really important point. Because the reason I wanted to kind of talk with you about that is I look at the contribution that lesbian women have made to the HIV struggle back in the 80s, and even now, we've got wonderful people like yourself, but like Deborah Gold at National AIDS Trust, like Professor Chloe Orkin. I mean, there's these wonderful, powerful women. And, you know, if you think of some of the most powerful people, some of the who have actually really made change in terms of the struggle around HIV, so many of them are lesbian.
And I think it's important to point out, I mean, your first question sort of slightly assumed that it would be weird to be involved in HIV unless you were personally at heightened risk. And actually, a lot of people are involved in things like HIV because we care about some of the people, or indeed, hopefully all of the people who are at heightened risk. When I found out about HIV, it was before it had a name. We were answering the phones on Gay Switchboard in London, as it was then, and it started to be called gay-related immune deficiency. This was my community. These were my friends. These were the people answering phones with me who were getting sick or frightened of getting sick. Of course I got stuck in.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because now aidsmap came out of the lesbian and gay switchboard. So what was it like giving information about HIV when there was so little knowledge and information at that time?
Well, there was very little at the start. And we were trying to get information from the States. It's actually very like it is in the TV series It's a Sin. It really was that scarce. But there were cheap flights to New York, and we were hoping that people would bring back every piece of information they could. You have to remember this, there was no internet in the early 1980s. It literally didn't exist. Phone calls were very expensive. Mostly it was people bringing back pieces of written literature. And as we started to know more, we started to end every single phone call of anyone who called Switchboard with, by the way, have you heard about AIDS? And that was incredibly important. And Switchboard and Capital Gay, which was a newspaper that was mainly only available in London, were the only two real sources of HIV information up until the mid-80s, and that was incredibly important. But at Switchboard, it was every call, every caller. And some people would say, yeah, you told me about it the last 5 times, and that's fine. But there were a lot of people who go, am I allowed to talk to you about that? I've got a few worries. Yeah.
I've been listening to the Logbooks podcast, which you feature on, which is a podcast which is about it's the logbooks from Lesbian and Gay Switchboard, and it has a couple of episodes in the second season which are about how Switchboard responded to HIV and the sheer volume of calls which they then had to take, because of course Switchboard was actually mentioned on the Iceberg and Tombstone leaflet, wasn't it?
Well, that was a bit of a shock. We found out about that 2 weeks before the leaflet went out, when it had already been printed. Nobody had actually asked us. And as an apology, the government gave us a new phone system, which was actually, it was experimental and it kept breaking down. So it actually made things worse, not better. As I've said to Norman Fowler fairly recently, and as he agreed with me, when they put that leaflet out with the number of lesbian and gay switchboard on the back of it, it didn't occur to them that not only were they telling every household in the country about a helpline that would talk to them about AIDS, as we called it then, they were also giving every household in the country where anyone had ever had the faintest inkling that they might not be straight, a 24-hour hotline to a bunch of queers who could talk to them about whether they were lesbian, gay, bi, trans, whatever. And actually, we didn't just get an influx of calls about HIV. We also got a massive number of coming out calls that year. So, that was really handy. So
fabulous.
Yeah.
I think it often,
not sure it was fabulous at the time, but yeah, it really, really was. So Norman Fowler, thank you from Queerdom.
I love that the phone system didn't work, and I think it's so often when we kind of review the activism of the past through rose-tinted spectacles and kind of forget the chaos that there was.
There were phone lines where it wouldn't cut off, so the next call would just come through without the thing even ringing. There were other ones that malfunctioned, so sometimes, although we had 5 lines, only 2 would be working. And it went on like that for months. And the BT engineers wouldn't come and repair it in case they got AIDS off people at Switchboard.
Wow.
They wouldn't even work on the lines at the exchange because somehow they were going to get it down the lines. It was a real nightmare.
Shows the importance of accurate and reliable information. Lisa, I've got to ask you, founder member of Stonewall. So
Yeah.
do you think when you sat in, was it Ian McKellen's kitchen, plotting this, did you think that we would make as much progress as we have done? Or
It was mostly Ian McKellen's terrace, and we used to nip over the fence to next door and borrow David Owen's garden furniture while he was trying to sort out Bosnia. We'd nick all his furniture for the meetings. We had no idea what we were doing. We really didn't know that it was going to turn into what it did turn into and what it has become. And I really want to say, because this has been a crappy month for Stonewall, the mainstream press have been awful to them. I am so proud of them now. I am prouder of them now than at any time since I've stepped down from actually working with them. I think that they do an incredible job. I think that they are doing their level best to protect every person within our big umbrella queer family. And I really, I think people need to step up and show them some support as well as the trans community at the moment.
I absolutely agree with you. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Bye.
We have such a packed show. We should have said at the top of the show, because we have 4 guests, we are going to be slightly longer this evening. We've got a 40-minute show rather than the usual 30-minute show. But still, with this number of guests, we have to crack on with the next guest. And our next guest is Dr. Mike Brady, who is the National Advisor for LGBT Health.
Hi, guys.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm really, really excited to be here. I love an aidsmapCHAT.
Marvellous.
Fantastic. So, Mike, what would you say, as the National LGBT Health Advisor, are the biggest health inequalities experienced by LGBT people at the moment?
Okay, I think the first thing to say is that there are inequalities in every single area of health for LGBT plus individuals. We're not great at collecting the data, so we've got massive gaps in our data about the experience and the outcomes for LGBT plus people, but where we do collect the data, their experience of healthcare, their access to healthcare, and their outcomes from healthcare are worse than compared to their cisgendered and heterosexual peers. And the worst of the worst experience and outcome and access is for trans, non-binary and gender diverse people. Within that, probably the area that you'd need to pull out if you had to pick a more common one is mental health. We do actually have better data in mental health, but across the board, every single mental health problem, depression, anxiety, suicide, self-harm, psychosis, every single one is at least twice as common in LGBT plus people, and it's the most common in trans and non-binary people.
And it just hammers home why pride is important, doesn't it? Because, inevitably the fact that as a lesbian, gay, bisexual or trans person growing up in a society where you will hear that you are wrong and you are sick and you are disordered, and even if you grow up in a liberal environment, you will hear that because it is everywhere, and you will be aware of the attacks upon our communities, and that has to have an impact on our mental health, on all of our mental health, which is why pride is so important. Is we need to give ourselves something as a community to kind of hold on to, because we are valuable. I mean, I say to people on Twitter the whole time, you are precious, you are so precious, because I hate it when I see people not believing that about themselves.
Yeah,
and
sorry. Right, sorry to cut in, Matthew, but I was absolutely right. And there's lots of, I don't want to make it all kind of sciencey, but there is data that shows that mental health problems in lesbian, gay, bisexual children and young people, or children and young people who are going to eventually come out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, is you can demonstrate those mental health differences as young as the age of 10, which speaks to that toxic environment that you're referring to. You know, the transphobia, the homophobia, the jokes. I don't even like the word microaggression, because an aggression is an aggression, but you know, the media, the language that's used all around, it just constantly reinforces to people, like you say, that they're not valued and they're not worthy, and that's the seeds of those problems, those mental health problems, and then they just get worse usually during adolescence and into adulthood. Which is, you're right, which is why the pride is so important, particularly that sense of community, that sense of support that we give to each other, the support that we've lost a lot during COVID and lockdown, the fact that we're the ones being isolated, you know, and we see that in surveys of LGBT plus people, that COVID and lockdown has been so difficult because it's forced them to live in LGBT phobic environments that perhaps they wouldn't spend as much time in, or certainly they've been separated from that really important social support that we use pride to remind ourselves of. The other thing, I mean, certainly from the healthcare setting, I mean, it's a good time to focus on the inequalities, but I do go around telling everybody that, you know, Pride Month is every month for those of us that are working in the LGBT plus field. It's great to have this month to focus, but let's just not stop doing the work as soon as we get to the 1st of July. Absolutely.
You were kind of talking about how, you know, the level of hostility, and it feels to me that particularly against trans communities, the hostility has really ramped up, and it's almost become like kind of a culture war kind of thing going on, and society is perhaps becoming more divided. Now, as the National LGBT Health Advisor, I mean, what do you think you can, what are you advising? How can we repair this? Are there ways that we can build back stronger?
Yeah, I mean, I think my advice to healthcare professionals and providers is that you have to take it back to first principles, and it's in the NHS constitution. We talk about treating everybody equally, treating everybody with respect. We talk about addressing health inequalities and equity and equality for all, and it's through that lens that we have to look at everything that we do. So I'm constantly talking to people about, let's use trans and non-binary people as an example, because their health inequalities are probably the greatest. You know, you need to take a step back and really look at your service and think, is it truly inclusive of trans and non-binary people? Is your language gender affirming? Is it non-binary? Are you encouraging staff to use their pronouns? Are you looking at your imagery and your health promotion or on your websites to ensure that they've got same-sex couples or trans and non-binary? That representation, that visibility. And I think often there is a real focus in healthcare on inequalities, and COVID, if you want to look for silver linings, has highlighted that approach. You know, there is more money and there is more focus, but often that's not enough on LGBT plus individuals, and certainly not enough on trans and non-binary. So I think part of my job and part of my argument is that you need to be spending as much time, quite rightly, that you're doing thinking about the inequalities around ethnicity or disability. You need to be spending as much time on that as addressing the inequalities for LGBT plus people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the government has committed to 0 HIV infections by 2030. Do you think that this is actually achievable for all groups?
I do think it's achievable for all groups. I mean, I don't think if I'd said that so definitively 5 or certainly 10 years ago, but you know, we know how to do it. You know, we have all of the tools, we have the testing technologies, we have a range of ways to test for HIV, whether that's online, doing it yourself, going to a clinic, different settings. We have pre-exposure prophylaxis, we have really amazing treatment, which certainly in this country you can access easily and quickly and cheaply. So we have all of the tools. It's just about now how we use them. We're certainly seeing really dramatic reductions in HIV diagnoses and HIV transmissions, predominantly being driven by gay men, and that's where we need to be focusing on thinking about the inequalities, because the biggest reductions, those who are getting the most impact from these HIV prevention strategies, are more likely to be white, UK-born, well-educated, city-living gay men. So it shouldn't and mustn't be beyond our abilities to take those principles and then to refocus them in a culturally appropriate or targeted way to those groups who we know carry significant risk of HIV, but yet are underserved by our services. So people of colour, those from ethnic minorities, gay and bisexual men who don't identify as gay and bisexual, trans communities, so heterosexuals who are high risk for HIV but are not accessing sexual health services. So with time, where are we now? We've got about 8 years. 8 years is more than enough if we have a properly focused approach to use the tools that we have in the populations who need them.
Wonderful.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really great to chat with you. Always an inspiration.
Thanks for the invite.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mike.
Yes, bye.
Bye-bye.
I mean, I guess, it feels often in the UK that we have so much privilege in terms of where we are, certainly with lesbian, gay and bisexual rights. I think the reverses we've seen in terms of trans rights recently, and that ramping up of invective against trans and non-binary people, is certainly a matter of huge concern for me. And I think it illustrates that our rights are vulnerable as LGBTQ communities. But also we've got to acknowledge that actually we're really privileged in the UK, because we do enjoy, as LGBTQ communities, so many more rights than people in other countries. And we talk about Pride, and it is a celebration of what we've achieved, but it's also a fight, it's a struggle. It came out of conflict. The Stonewall riots were a riot. And I mean, I was looking at some footage just yesterday of the attempt with the Pride march in Turkey, which was broken up by the police. And, it's quite horrific to see the police wading into the crowd in that way. And in the last year, we've seen new anti-gay legislation introduced in Hungary and in Uganda. There's an activist that I know of in Kenya who was murdered. The Kenyan gay community and queer community are under such pressure. They are not safe. And I've also seen, there was a very disturbing account of a trans man who was attacked, in England last week, and the murder rate for trans people in the US is on track to be the highest rate probably ever. We celebrate Pride, but we recognize where it comes from, and it comes from a place where LGBT people are not necessarily safe. And I think it's really beholden upon all of us to seek out ways that we can support our LGBT siblings around the world, find out how we can support them, because we shouldn't take the privileges and the equality and the rights that we enjoy for granted.
Absolutely.
I would really like to bring our next guest on. Oh, bless you. Our next guest is the fabulous Juno Roche.
Hi.
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno.
I literally just coughed it. I just literally coughed at exactly the same time as you.
Me too. I'm like so aligned. You just you have one thought.
Indeed, and coughing is such a faux pas now.
I know, but hay fever is awful this year. I think that seems to be a kind of common thread this year, is that hay fever is kind of laying us all low. Anyway. Lovely to be here.
Juno,
wonderful to have you.
It's so wonderful to have you. I actually just I want to actually talk with you about something which we were just talking about. So before we started recording, when I was emailing Juno about being a guest on the show, and I said, well, do we talk about the murder rate of trans people? Do we talk about violence against trans people? I guess I felt really upset when I saw this account of this trans man who was attacked in England last week. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this information, because if I share it on social media, does that normalize violence against trans people? I wasn't sure what the right thing to do was, because I find it so deeply upsetting.
I mean, I think, I honestly, I mean, I think that we're in a kind of, we're in a moment where many of us who have been kind of working in and around this for a long time are kind of shocked by the intensity of the attacks in different ways, be they legalistic, be they violent on the street, be they in the media, be they the Guardian, be they the Observer, be they people that have really had our backs for a long time. I mean, I think it's really difficult. I've kind of highlighted that case because for me, not that I want to dwell on it or to sensationalize the violence, but, you know, it's really important that someone was attacked and what they wanted to do was to rip off their clothes to expose their genitals. In some kind of way, it was this notion that, you know, there's this kind of thing at the moment that we're not real, that we're out to trick the world, that we're out to kind of lie about who we are, and that actually if people just kind of put some pressure on us, that we'll just go away, which is just not going to happen. We have always been here in one form or another, and I think it's really important to kind of to know that our community, I mean, Trans Pride, I mean, I'm obviously out of the country at the moment, but looking at the pictures from Trans Pride, it was kind of amazing, the resilience and the beauty and the strength of the community, community that I'm part of is really, you know, we're not going away. So all of the attacks are brutal and horrible. The attacks on Stonewall, I think I was listening to what Lisa said, and I completely agree. I mean, the attacks on Stonewall, the attempts to obliterate Stonewall because of their support of trans people is just unforgivable, because the people that are doing it aren't even LGBT. They're not lesbian, gay or bisexual. The people that are doing it are principally cis straight men. Yeah. And you think, how dare you get off of our patch and worry about your own. But in a way, I'm kind of like, the only thing I know that I've got a clock here which tells me when I'm at 2.5 minutes of talking time, just to keep it whatever. But like I mean, you know, it's not gonna, for me, there's a kind of sense of they're kicking back against us because we are winning. I wrote a book last year that came out last year where I interviewed some of the youngest trans people in the country. And honestly, when I interviewed them, I just thought, you know what? These people have got no idea what's coming. These people have got no idea of what's coming, how brilliant these young people are, how sorted they are, how together they are. You know, Trump, if Trump wasn't already gone, they would have got rid of him very quickly. I suddenly saw the antidote to people like Trump, and I thought, we're winning. It doesn't feel like it now. It feels like we're being attacked, but by God, we're winning.
That's wonderful, and I'm so pleased that you've written your tremendous book, because discussions about young trans people are becoming really heated, but we so infrequently hear what they have to say. If we got a chance to listen, you know, what sort of things are young trans people saying, Juno?
What I mean, across the board, what they're saying is, I want to go to school on Monday and be happy. I want to get on with my life and be happy. All I want you to do is respect the fact, you know, and I interview an 8-year-old in the book who said to me, you know, I love science, but I can't enjoy being at school at the moment because although they allow me to use a boy's name, they won't change my pronouns. So they call me a boy's name, but call me she. Let's say, for example, I'm going to use your name, Matthew. They call me Matthew, but Matthew is a she in school. And they said to me, this is an 8-year-old. And they said, it kind of does my head in, and it makes me not want to go to school and be happy. And all I want to do is become a scientist. These kids aren't asking for anything more than all of us ask for every day, which is to be the best version of ourselves. So that's what they're saying. And they're also not, they're kind of saying, I want to play with gender. I want to see where I fit with gender. I don't know at the moment if I'm definitely this or definitely that. What I want to do is be able to explore it, which is why I called the book Gender Explorers and not Trans Kids. Because in a way, they all said to me that they were much keener on kind of exploring gender than saying at 8 years old that they were definitely trans. In fact, most of them don't even know the word trans. What they're doing is being supported often by parents who are being utterly demonized. What they're doing is being supported to be the best version of themselves. And, you know, I was a primary school teacher, and well, as a secondary school and a primary school teacher. But especially when I was a primary school teacher, I used to say to the kids all the time, just be the best that you can be and don't hurt anyone. And if you can do those two things, chances are you're going to come out the right side of right. You know, you're going to be all right. And, you know, but what we do with trans kids is go, oh, no, you can't be the best version that you can be because we don't believe you. We think someone's forcing you to be this thing. And they're going, no, I'm not. I just want to go to school as myself on Monday. Like, I really like wearing this skirt and I really like my hair like this. And it's not, I get that. And some of them are so sophisticated. They go, I know that I like the colour pink, and I know that you might think that I'm being forced into socialised to like the colour pink, but actually that's the same for everyone else. That's the same as all my friends in the class. I'm only doing what they do. Why is it okay for them and not okay for me? I mean, I think if we sat down and just listened to them, we would realise that the world could be in much better hands. Yeah.
And I think that was I really loved about Gender Explorers, is that there's been so much discussion about young trans people, about trans children, and absent from all of that discussion, as far as I was aware, in the media and in all those shows, was the voice of those kids themselves. And then you brought that right out into the open. And when you read it, and you're just going to go, this isn't, they're just exploring, and you have the option. Do you want to support them and let them be happy? Yeah. Or do you want to just tell them that they're wrong the whole time, which is cruel?
It's just really, and the thing is, like, I opened the book by talking about my own experience of coming out in 1972 and then being told, you can't do that. If you do that, you're mentally ill. And that's what I was told in 1972. And therefore, I went off and wasted years in addiction and negative, risky behavior because I didn't care, because someone told me that this body that I was in was mentally unstable and broken. And it never felt like that in 1972. When I came out in the playground in 1972 and everyone called me Pansy, I know that they were calling me a pansy, but I loved the name. But when everyone called me Pansy, I just felt alive. I felt happy and I felt in my body. And that's when I wrote the book. I didn't talk much. In my two previous books, I interview people and I really talk to them and I get into stuff. With these, I just really let them talk. I really wanted to create this kind of document of safety where they were just with their parents and their grandparents and their friends and their siblings often, where they could just tell us what was going on for them and what life was like. And
it's so important. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Juno.
Okay.
We have to press on because
it's fun. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to see you, Juno.
And you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
And we're going to bring on our final guest. Our final guest is the iconic LGBT and human rights campaigner, Peter Tatchell. I hope he's here. Here he is, Peter.
Hello, Peter. Thank you.
Great to join you.
So wonderful to have you on.
Can I just say something briefly?
Yes.
You did a lovely introduction, but really, I want to emphasize, I am only one of many. I do my bit, but so do you and thousands and thousands of others. It's together that we make the change.
Absolutely, I wholeheartedly take on board that. But Peter, I'll just say, I've known you for many years, and you have inspired me. And I often think when people say to me, "Oh, you've done something good," or "Thank you," I kind of go, "Well, actually, I stand on the shoulders of giants." We all should learn from those who we follow. And I hope that people will learn from me as I have learned from you, and as I know that you have learned from people before you. We are part of a great continuum. But my God, Peter, you're just great.
Peter, I watched Hating Peter Tatchell on Netflix over the weekend, and I was really struck by the decades of activism and in terms of LGBT rights and human rights that you've done. And at the end of the documentary, there was a quote from you: "Don't accept the world as it is, dream of what the world could be and then make it happen. How do you think that your activism has changed the world?
Well, like I just said, I think I've made my contribution, but it's only been in collaboration with many other people. You know, one person cannot change the world, but one person plus another person plus another person and so on, we collectively can and have changed the world. So when I was growing up as a teenager in my hometown of Melbourne, Australia, in the 1960s, homosexuality was still totally illegal in all circumstances. You could get several years imprisonment and even be forced to undergo psychiatric treatment. Now just look at the changes, you know, so many changes. Here in Britain, when I first arrived in 1971, aged 19, and joined the newly formed Gay Liberation Front, we had the whole establishment against us. You know, the medical profession, the media, the government, the police, the courts, the church, you name it. It was a totally uphill battle, but we never lost hope. You know, we kept on campaigning and fighting. And so we're now in a situation where all those terrible homophobic laws that once existed are now history. And that is a phenomenal achievement.
But we haven't achieved that globally. And I know that you've been increasingly involved, would be my perception, in the international struggle. So what do you where's the major battles now, and what can we do to support LGBT people internationally?
Well, of course, there are still battles to fight here in the UK, like reforming the Gender Recognition Act to allow trans people to self-ID, like banning LGBT plus conversion therapy, like securing a safe haven for LGBT plus people who are fleeing persecution abroad. But you're right, the real front line of the struggle for LGBT plus rights is global. And there are still 71 countries that criminalize same-sex relations. 11 have the death penalty. Half of them are members of the Commonwealth, which is supposedly committed to equality and human rights for all. You know, so the battles are still there to be fought. Although on the positive side, we have secured decriminalization of same-sex relations in nearly 40 countries over the last 4 decades. So that is progress. And many of you are familiar with some of the recent victories in Botswana, India, Trinidad and Tobago, Gabon, Mozambique. The list goes on. So there is a trend both in support of our rights and freedoms, but as was mentioned earlier, there's also a backlash in some countries. It's only about 20 countries out of 193, but that backlash is very scary in countries like Indonesia, Uganda, Nigeria, Russia, and so on.
What's shaming? Also,
yeah,
no, I'm
how
go.
important? We're fighting to speak to you. I just wonder about how important is activism in addressing these abhorrent practices.
Well, of course, all throughout history, every bit of social progress has been won by people saying enough is enough. You know, protest has been the litmus test that's ignited this movement for social equality, whether it be the Chartists or the suffragettes, whether it be LGBT plus rights or the rights of Black and ethnic minority people and women. You know, all these struggles began as protests. So activism is so vital. Without activism, we don't get change.
One of the things which I find really pernicious about the way which anti-gay legislation is introduced or maintained is this idea that somehow it is helpful in the struggle against HIV. And we know, we have the data now that tells us really clearly that in countries where same-sex sexual activity is penalized, they have much lower rates, 11% lower rates of people being diagnosed and 8% lower rates of viral suppression. I mean, we can actually can pinpoint on the data charts what the impact is. So the struggle for LGBT equality is also part of the struggle. It's integral to the struggle against the HIV epidemic.
You're right. There's an absolute link between criminalization and HIV transmission, not just for men who have sex with men, but also for sex workers, IV drug users, and so on. So, securing more liberal progressive laws is absolutely vital to encourage people to come forward to get tested, and if they test positive, to get treatment. And I know from the many, many individuals that my foundation helps, that there are many people who are deterred from coming forward because they fear that if they go to a sexual health clinic and feel obliged to tell their sexual history, they will then be turned over to the police. And that means that they don't know their HIV status, or in some cases they do, but they're too afraid to get treatment. And it really is literally condemning people to die from a disease that is now manageable with the right testing and treatment.
Absolutely. Access to testing and treatment is so important. Homophobia creates barriers. It's the Pride Special Edition. Peter, you organized, I think, the first UK Pride March in 1972. And this year you're involved in a new Pride protest march. Is that right? Tell us about that.
Well, I was one of about 30 or 40 people who helped organize the first Pride in Britain in 1972. But you're right. This year, on the 24th of July, we're going to have a huge Reclaim Pride March, a People's Pride March, a Liberation Pride March, to get back to the roots of what Pride was always originally about, which is community-based, which is about celebrating our life, our contribution to society, our gains and successes, but also pushing forward the demand for government action to resolve the unfinished issues of LGBT plus rights, like a ban on conversion therapy, like reform of the Gender Recognition Act, like a safe haven for LGBT plus refugees. So our march is going to be, tell Boris, stop stalling on LGBT plus rights. We're assembling at 1 p.m. in Parliament Square. We're going to march up Whitehall, then have a shout out against the Prime Minister's delays and obstructions on LGBT plus reform. Then at Trafalgar Square, we're going to stop outside the Ugandan High Commission to express our solidarity with the brave, heroic defenders there who are risking their lives and liberty to stand up for LGBT plus freedom. And then we're going to almost follow the exact original route of the 1972 First Pride Parade and end up via Lower Regent Street, and Oxford Street in Hyde Park for a gigantic queer picnic, where everybody's going to be encouraged to bring your own food, drink, and music. It's going to be a grassroots queer picnic, just like the Gay Liberation Front had in 1972, also in Hyde Park, at the conclusion of that first Pride Parade. So we really need everybody's help to spread the word. We don't have a huge budget. We've got growing numbers of organizations on board. The initial impetus has come from my own Peter Tatchell Foundation, UK Black Pride, and Diva Magazine and Lesbian Visibility Week. But we're in the process of getting lots more organizations on board. If you're part of an organization, please get them to sign up. It doesn't cost anything. You just turn up and march. But we need people to help spread the word, and we need people to turn up on the day. So please do what you can to spread the word and join us for what is going to be an absolutely fabulous day.
I will definitely be there, and I think you've just helped spread the word. So thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's been a joy having you on.
It's been a great honor also with the other panelists, I admire you all, and you all do great work. So it's a great honor to join you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Peter is so modest and he's so humble because he has achieved so much, but he is absolutely right, because all of our panelists today have been incredible leaders in their field. They've been really fighting for LGBTQ rights, not just in the UK, but internationally. And, it's been a real proud moment to have them on the show.
It has, and unfortunately we have run out of time.
Yes, so we've got to thank our sponsors, Lloyd's Pharmacy. We've got to thank our wonderful panel of guests. We've got to thank all the crew at Disruptive for putting the show on. Thank you all so much. We are back next week because this was a special edition. So we are back next Monday at 6 o'clock. I hope you can join us then.
See you then, everyone. Bye-bye.